The night air was heavy with silence, broken only by the distant cry of an owl perched somewhere deep in the forest. A single candle burned inside the small cottage on the hill, its glow trembling against the window pane. From afar, the place looked abandoned, the kind of house travelers would avoid, whispering stories of spirits and curses. But within its walls, a woman sat by the fire, her eyes reflecting a quiet storm. Sabrina. Her hands moved with practiced ease, grinding herbs into a wooden bowl, the rhythmic motion steady, almost calming. Yet her face carried the weight of memories too heavy for her years. Anyone who saw her might have mistaken her for a recluse, a woman hiding from the world. But she wasn't hiding. She was surviving. Once she had lived in the heart of the kingdom, surrounded by family and laughter. Her father, a man of great wisdom, and her mother, a woman with the same healing gift, had been respected, until envy poisoned the nobles' tongues. What they called a blessing, the royal house twisted into a curse. Witchcraft, they had declared, and with that single word, her family's fate was sealed. She could still hear the echo of the judgment, the jeering crowd as guards escorted them out of the capital, stripped of honor, stripped of name. She had been just a girl then, clutching her mother's skirts as the gates closed behind them forever. Years later, her parents were gone, and she alone carried the legacy of healing, a legacy that both saved her and condemned her. A soft knock startled her from her thoughts. It was faint, hurried, like the tap of someone who did not wish to be noticed. Sabrina set down the pestle and crossed the small room, pulling the door open just enough to reveal a hooded figure. A villager. His eyes darted nervously over his shoulder, checking the shadows before slipping inside. "My child burns with fever," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Please, you must help her." Sabrina's expression softened. She motioned him toward the chair by the fire and opened a small chest of herbs. She did not scold him for coming at such an hour, nor did she ask for payment. She only worked, hands swift, mixing a poultice, whispering instructions on how to place it against the child's chest. The man's relief showed in his shaking hands as he accepted the cure. "Go quickly," she told him, "and let no one see you leave." The man nodded, pulling his hood tighter before slipping back into the night. When the door closed, silence returned. But it was a different kind of silence, one laced with loneliness. Sabrina stood still for a long moment, staring into the fire. The villagers feared her, yet they needed her. They cursed her name in daylight, but sought her help in darkness. She was the hand that healed their wounds, but never the face they welcomed in the market square. Her lips pressed into a bitter line. It was always the same. They feared her because the royal family had taught them to fear her kind. Her hands curled into fists as she remembered the seal of the crown, the voice of the king before Darius, condemning her family. Nobles had clapped their jeweled hands together in false righteousness, while a child's life, her life, was thrown into exile. "I will never forgive them," she murmured into the empty room, her voice low but sharp. "Not the crown, not the nobles. They destroyed everything." The candle flickered, and for a moment, her shadow stretched long against the wall, as though the bitterness inside her had taken shape. Outside, the night was still, but the winds carried whispers of change, whispers that would soon draw a stranger to her door, a stranger who would unravel her carefully built walls. The council chamber was too still, the kind of stillness that pressed against the marble walls and seemed to hold its breath. Only the faint scrape of jeweled rings against polished tables broke the hush. Golden torches burned along the columns, their light glinting off the crests of the four great clans etched into stone. East, west, north, south. A reminder that this chamber did not belong to Darius alone. It was the heart of the kingdom, and every clan had carved its place within it. At the head of the chamber sat Alpha King Darius. His frame was powerful, his presence commanding, but tonight, there was a hardness in his jaw that spoke of restraint. The elders watched him with restless eyes, whispering behind their sleeves, waiting for the Queen Mother to speak. Eloise sat at his side, regal in her silver gown, her crown gleaming beneath the torchlight. Though her son wore the title of king, everyone knew the Queen Mother's voice still carried the weight of steel. Her gaze was fixed on him, sharp, unyielding, the kind of gaze that could bend iron. "Darius," she said at last, her voice cutting through the silence. "The moon ceremony approaches. The kingdom waits for their Luna. You must choose." A murmur of agreement rose among the nobles. One elder leaned forward, his heavy chain of office clinking. "The clans grow restless, my king. Without a Luna, without heirs, the balance of power will weaken. Enemies outside our borders watch for such cracks." Another noble, a woman with a hawk's stare, added, "There are noble-born Omegas eager to serve, daughters of great houses. You have but to select one and the ceremony will bind our kingdom in strength." Darius leaned back in his chair, his fingers drumming against the armrest. He let their words wash over him, but his silence was not agreement. It was fire held on a leash. Finally, he spoke. "And tell me," he said slowly, his voice carrying to every corner of the chamber, "when did a mate become a political tool instead of the bond the moon goddess intended?" The question cut through the chamber. Some nobles shifted uncomfortably, others stiffened in indignation. Eloise's lips tightened. "Do not be naive, son. The moon goddess gives us bonds, yes, but kings cannot afford to wait for chance. Every king before you has chosen wisely, strengthening ties with the clans. You will do the same." Darius turned to her, his eyes flashing with something between defiance and sorrow. "What you call wisdom, I call chains. I will not chain myself to a woman chosen for power, not love. I will not dishonor the bond by turning it into a bargain." The nobles erupted in protest. "This is reckless. Without a Luna, the ceremony is meaningless. You risk the stability of the realm." Eloise raised her hand, silencing them, but her gaze never left her son. "Reckless, Darius, is thinking the kingdom will wait for your heart to make a choice. You are not just a man. You are the Alpha King. Your duty comes before your desire." His hand clenched into a fist against the armrest. He wanted to shout, to unleash the storm clawing inside his chest, but he forced his voice to remain steady. "My duty is to protect this kingdom, not to bind myself to a mate I cannot honor. A Luna chosen from your lists would not be my partner. She would be your puppet." The words hung in the air like a strike of lightning. Some of the nobles gasped, others whispered furiously. Eloise's expression hardened, but beneath her steel, something flickered, a flash of wounded pride, perhaps even fear. "Careful, son," she said softly, though her tone carried the weight of warning. "Your words cut deeper than you know." Darius rose from his seat, towering over the chamber. "Then hear me clearly. I will not choose from your lists. I will not bow to your politics. When I take a Luna, it will be by the will of the moon goddess, not by the hunger of nobles." For a moment, silence consumed the chamber. Even the torches seemed to still. The council had never been so openly defied. Eloise's eyes narrowed, but her voice was calm. "And what will you do, Darius? Wait for fate to deliver a mate to your door? Hope that the goddess herself places a crown on some peasant girl's head?" The corners of Darius's lips curved in the faintest smirk, though his eyes burned. "Perhaps I will. Perhaps I will find her myself." Gasps filled the chamber, outrage spilling from the nobles like a flood. "Absurd! A king does not stoop to such foolishness. The clans will rebel." But Darius did not flinch. His gaze swept over them all, a storm held barely in check. "You call it foolishness. I call it freedom." Then, without waiting for their protests, he turned and strode from the chamber, his footsteps echoing against the stone. Behind him, the chamber erupted in chaos, nobles shouting, Eloise calling for order, the torches sputtering as though shaken by the storm of his defiance. The palace corridors were still ringing with the echoes of his footsteps when Darius reached his private chambers. Servants bowed low as he passed, but he barely saw them. His mind was fire, his blood thunder. He had defied them all, his mother, the nobles, the council of clans, and for the first time in his reign, he felt both the weight of the crown and the strange lightness of freedom. By the window the moon hung low, silver and watchful. Darius leaned against the cold stone, his reflection staring back at him. The Alpha King everyone saw was a man in fine robes, crowned with gold, carrying power that shook the ground when he walked. But beneath it all, what was he? A son bound by tradition? A ruler chained to expectations? Or a man who longed just once for love untainted by politics? A soft knock broke his thoughts. Eloise entered without waiting for his word, her presence filling the room. She was calmer now, her anger buried beneath poise, but her eyes, those sharp, unyielding eyes, missed nothing. "You spoke like a child in the council," she said, her tone measured. "Reckless, stubborn. Do you understand the danger you invite?" Darius met her gaze evenly. "I understand. That is why I must go." Her brow furrowed. "Go? Where?" He turned away from the window and opened a chest at the foot of his bed. Inside lay simple garments, plain, rough, the kind of clothes worn by men who slept in stables and begged for scraps. He lifted them slowly, his hands steady. Eloise's voice sharpened. "Darius, do not tell me. I will not be forced into a union," he interrupted. "If I am to have a mate, it will not be chosen by this council. I will find her myself, away from these walls, away from your lists." Eloise's mask of composure cracked just slightly. "You would abandon your throne? Your duty?" "I will not abandon it," he said firmly. "You will hold power in my absence. The nobles already bend to your will more than mine. Let them think I am away hunting alliances if you must. But I will not return until I have an answer. Not from their lists, but from the moon goddess herself." Silence stretched between them, heavy and unrelenting. At last, Eloise spoke, her voice low. "You are your father's son. Too proud, too stubborn. This kingdom cannot afford your whims." Darius paused, looking at her, and for a fleeting moment the hardness in his eyes softened. "It is not whim, mother. It is truth. If fate has chosen someone for me, I will find her, even if I must walk among beggars to see her face." And with that, he stripped away the fine robes, laying aside every symbol of his power. He dressed in rough trousers, a torn tunic, and a cloak faded with wear. His crown he left on the table, gleaming under torchlight like a silent witness to his rebellion. When he pulled the hood over his head, he was no longer the Alpha King. He was a man stripped bare, nameless and unguarded. He left before dawn. No guards, no horses, just the weight of his choice and the path stretching into the unknown. The kingdom outside the palace walls was harsher than he had imagined. Roads were muddy, villages crowded with suspicion. He passed through marketplaces where merchants shoved him aside, muttering curses at his shabby appearance. Children pointed, laughing at the stranger who looked more beggar than man. By evening he found himself at a tavern, the smell of roasted meat and ale taunting his hunger. He entered quietly, hoping for warmth, perhaps a scrap of food. But the moment he stepped in, heads turned. An alpha seated at a long table sneered at him. "Look here, boys, a wolf without a pack. Or is he even a wolf at all?" Laughter erupted. Another alpha, broad-shouldered and scarred, leaned forward. "No Omega in her right mind would touch you, stranger. Not unless she were blind." The mocking words stung deeper than they should have. Darius's wolf growled within him, pride demanding he reveal himself, crush their arrogance with the truth of who he was. But he swallowed it down. He could not betray his disguise. When he approached the bar, the innkeeper waved him off. "No coin, no food. Get out before you sour the air." He turned away, his stomach twisting in hunger. Outside, a group of young Omegas passed, their laughter ringing in the cold night. They glanced at him, ragged, hooded, worn. One of them wrinkled her nose. "Disgusting," she muttered loudly. Another giggled, tugging her cloak closer. No wonder no one would ever choose him as a mate. Their words cut sharper than any blade. For the first time, Darius felt the sting of being unseen, unwanted. This was what it meant to live powerless, to be mocked and dismissed. By the time night fell, he was cold, hungry, and weary. He found no welcome, no kindness, only doors shut in his face. His disguise had stripped him of honor in the eyes of others, but in his heart he clung to the resolve that had driven him from the palace. And yet, beneath the weight of rejection, a question lingered in his chest. How long could he walk this road before doubt devoured him? As the night deepened, the weight of loneliness pressed down on him harder than the rain. He had ruled from a throne of gold, yet now he had not a coin to buy food nor a roof to rest beneath. Hunger twisted his stomach until his vision blurred. His legs wobbled with each step, but still he pressed forward. He told himself he sought a mate who would love him, not the king, not the crown, but the wolf beneath it. Yet the question grew louder in his heart with every cruel word hurled at him. Would such a one exist at all? The storm grew violent, wind howling through the trees like angry spirits. His hair clung to his face, drenched, and every breath turned to mist in the air. He stumbled up a hill, his strength almost gone. And then, through the sheets of rain, he saw it. A faint glow, a flickering light that cut through the darkness. A cottage, small and lonely, perched against the storm as though it, too, had been exiled from the world. With the last of his strength, Darius pushed himself forward. His wolf clawed at his insides, urging him to keep moving, to reach the light. His vision dimmed, the edges blackening. Each step felt like walking through fire and ice. He reached the door, raised a trembling hand, and knocked weakly. The sound was barely more than a whisper against the thunder. His body gave way, collapsing heavily against the wooden frame. Inside, Sabrina stirred at the noise, her keen ears catching what others might have dismissed as storm and wind. She hesitated, her heart wary. Who would come to her door in such a night? But compassion, stronger than fear, pulled her to rise. She wrapped her shawl around her shoulders and stepped into the storm. Her eyes fell upon the broken figure at her doorstep, mud-smeared, trembling, and soaked to the bone. A stranger, cast aside by the world. Her healer's heart clenched. Without a thought, she bent low, her hands reaching to lift him. His weight sagged against her, heavy with exhaustion, but she pulled him inside, laying him by the firelight. For the first time in his journey, Darius felt warmth. A soft voice spoke over the storm, gentle and firm all at once. "You're safe now." And though he had no strength to answer, his wolf stirred inside him, recognizing something it had long sought but never found. The scorn of the kingdom had driven him to despair, but here, in the quiet glow of a stranger's cottage, his fate was about to shift. The cottage smelled of herbs and wood smoke, a strange mixture of sharpness and comfort. The fire crackled gently in the hearth, its glow stretching across the wooden walls like golden arms. Darius stirred faintly, his body still heavy from collapse, and felt a pair of steady hands on him. Soft, deliberate, careful. They did not shove him aside or strike him as others had, but held him as though he were something fragile that deserved saving. Sabrina bent over him, her shawl falling loosely around her shoulders, damp from her brief step into the storm. Her fingers pressed lightly against his forehead. Heat lingered there, not from fever, but from exhaustion. She clucked her tongue softly and whispered, "You've pushed yourself too far, stranger." He tried to open his mouth to answer, but no words came. His throat was dry, his lips cracked. Instead, she reached for a wooden cup filled with warm broth and pressed it gently against his lips. The rich scent of herbs and roots filled his nose before the liquid touched his tongue. He drank, and for the first time in days, the ache of hunger eased. "Slowly," she warned, tilting the cup away when he drank too fast. "You'll make yourself sick if you rush. There's more. You'll have your fill." Darius studied her through half-lidded eyes. Her face was framed by loose strands of dark hair, her features touched with both strength and weariness. She looked nothing like the noble women of the court who wore jewels and painted their lips crimson. Her beauty was quiet, almost hidden, yet it shone brighter than any crown he had ever seen. She didn't look at him with disgust or mockery, only concern. It struck him with more force than any insult had. When the broth was gone, she guided him toward the small cot by the fire. He tried to resist, mumbling that he could manage, but his legs betrayed him, buckling beneath his weight. She caught him again, supporting him with surprising strength for her small frame. "You're no burden," she said firmly, as if reading the shame in his silence. She lit a lamp and gathered her tools: jars of crushed herbs, rolls of cloth, a small basin of steaming water. Kneeling beside him, she began to peel away the ragged fabric clinging to his skin. Beneath it, bruises bloomed across his ribs, scratches scored his arms, and old wounds had festered from neglect. Her breath hitched faintly, at the cruelty of the world, not at him. "No one should be left like this," she murmured. Her hands were skilled, practiced. She cleaned each wound with careful precision, her touch gentle yet firm enough to draw out the filth. The sting of herbs burned, but her presence soothed. For every sharp pain, her voice followed with reassurance. "Almost done. You'll heal better than you think. Pain is a sign your body still fights." Darius found himself watching her more than the flames. He had been shown cruelty, mockery, disdain. But here, in this little cottage on the edge of the kingdom, kindness poured into him like warmth after endless cold. He had been a king all his life, obeyed, feared, and revered. Yet never, not once, had anyone touched him with such quiet care, asking for nothing in return. When she finally tied the last strip of cloth, she sat back and sighed. "That will hold. You need rest more than anything. The storm will pass by morning. Stay until then." Her words should have felt like a command, yet they soothed him like an invitation. His wolf, restless from days of rejection, stirred inside him, drawn to her voice, to her scent, to the calm strength that wrapped around her like a cloak. But Darius said nothing of who he was. Not king, not alpha, not ruler of clans. To her, he was just a stranger, a beggar at her door. He wanted, needed, it to remain that way. If she treated him with kindness because she saw the king, it would mean nothing. But if she saw only the man, and still chose to care, then perhaps the mate he sought was finally before him. As the firelight flickered across the walls, Sabrina adjusted the blanket over him. "Sleep," she whispered, more command than request. Her hand brushed his forehead once more, light as a feather, yet it sent a current racing through him, awakening something he never thought he could feel. Darius closed his eyes, not because he was tired, but because he wanted to hold on to the sound of her voice, the warmth of her presence, the tenderness of her touch. And for the first time in his reign, he felt seen. The storm had passed by dawn, leaving the world washed clean. Mist curled like silver ribbons through the forest outside, and the damp earth breathed out the smell of rain and pine. Birds called timidly from the branches, as if uncertain the night's fury was truly over. Inside the cottage, the fire had burned low, its glow softening into embers. Darius stirred, blinking at the faint shafts of sunlight slipping through the cracks in the wooden shutters. His body ached, but the sharp edge of pain had dulled under the healer's care. He shifted only to find a blanket tucked firmly around him, its warmth holding back the chill that clung to the morning air. For a moment he let himself simply feel it, the strangeness of comfort after so many nights of scorn. From across the room came the gentle scrape of wood against stone. Sabrina knelt at the hearth, stoking the embers back into flame. Her shawl had slipped from one shoulder, and the glow painted her face in amber hues. There was no trace of weariness in her movements, only calm rhythm, as though tending to life's smallest tasks was an art in itself. "You're awake," she said without turning, her voice low but certain. "I thought you'd sleep longer." He cleared his throat, surprised at how rough it sounded. "I don't usually sleep this well." She looked over her shoulder, a small curve touching her lips. "Then perhaps your body was long overdue for rest." She set a small pot of porridge over the fire, the smell of oats and herbs filling the cottage. "Can you sit?" Slowly, he pushed himself upright. His muscles protested, but not as sharply as before. "I can manage." She carried a wooden bowl to him, pressing it into his hands. The warmth seeped into his fingers before the food even touched his tongue. He ate slowly, savoring each bite as though it were a gift. In truth, it was. When silence stretched, Sabrina tilted her head. I still don't know your name, stranger. It's not every day someone collapses at my door. Darius hesitated. He lowered his gaze to the bowl. Call me Darius. Just a wanderer. I've been searching for a place to belong, though I've not yet found it. Sabrina studied him for a moment, as though weighing his words. Something softened in her expression. Not pity, but understanding. A wanderer, she repeated quietly. That explains the weariness in your eyes. The road can be unkind. You may call me Sabrina. It's only fair since I now know yours. Something in him stirred at the sound of her name. Gentle, unadorned, yet carrying strength. He let it linger in his chest like a flame refusing to die. And you? He finally asked, lifting his gaze to hers. Why do you live here, apart from the villages, alone in the woods? Surely a healer like you would be treasured in the heart of the clans. Her hand stilled on the rim of her bowl. For a long moment she said nothing, only staring into the fire as though its flames carried memories too heavy to bear. Finally, her voice came, steady but edged with sorrow. Treasured? She gave a faint, bitter laugh. No, stranger. My family was cast out, branded as witches by the very ones who should have honored us. Darius's chest tightened, though he kept his face still. My mother could mend bones with a touch. My father knew the roots that could cure fever. I inherited both their gifts. She drew in a breath, her hands curling into her lap. But the nobles feared us. The king. Her voice trembled but sharpened again. Not the one who reigns now, but those before him. They called it witchcraft. They stripped us of our name, our land, our honor. We were driven to the edges of the kingdom like vermin. She swallowed hard, her eyes glistening but unbroken. They killed my parents. The cold did what swords could not. I was left alone. Alone to survive, alone to heal, alone to hate. Her gaze lifted to meet his, fierce and unflinching. So when you ask why I live far away, it is because the world I once belonged to spat me out, and I have no desire to crawl back. Darius gripped the bowl tighter, his wolf restless within him. The words carved into his chest like claws. His family's legacy, the throne he sat upon, it had brought this pain to her. Though he himself had not passed that judgment, he bore the crown of those who had. To reveal himself now would be to tear open her wounds anew. So he remained silent, swallowing down the truth like poison. I'm sorry, he said softly, the words feeling woefully small against the weight of her pain. Her shoulders eased, though her eyes did not soften. Do not be sorry. You did not exile me. But if you wish to know me, you must know this. I do not forgive easily, and I will never forget what the royal house and its nobles took from me. The fire crackled between them, filling the silence that followed. Darius stared into the flames, his heart caught between duty and desire, truth and deception. He had set out to find a mate who would love him for who he was. But now, sitting across from this banished healer, he wondered if the truth of who he was would destroy the fragile bond beginning to form. And for the first time, Alpha King Darius, ruler of clans, heir of a ruthless throne, felt fear. Not of losing power, not of battle, but of losing her. The day passed quietly in the small cottage. Sabrina moved with purpose, grinding herbs with her mortar, laying bundles of dried leaves across the rafters, mending a torn cloth. Each task was done with a calm precision that left no room for wasted motion. She spoke little, but when she did, her words carried weight. By nightfall, the forest outside hushed under the silver pull of the moon. Shadows thickened between the trees, and an owl's distant call broke the silence. Darius lay on the cot by the fire, feigning sleep, but his ears picked up a sound. Footsteps. Light, hurried, stopping at the door before a timid knock followed. Sabrina, unsurprised, rose at once. She opened the door just enough to let a cloaked figure slip inside. A woman clutching a small boy whose face burned red with fever. The child whimpered, his breath shallow. The mother's eyes darted to Darius on the cot, wary, but Sabrina silenced her fear with a single glance. He's a traveler. Focus on your son. She guided them to a stool, her hands already reaching for jars on her shelf. She mixed herbs into a steaming cup, cooled it, and coaxed the boy to drink. Her touch was gentle, her voice steady, carrying both command and comfort. Slowly, the child's breathing eased, and his cries quieted into drowsy sighs. The mother clutched Sabrina's hand, gratitude brimming in her eyes. Bless you. May the moon keep you safe. Sabrina only nodded, ushering them back into the night as silently as they had come. But before long, another knock came, and another. All through the night, villagers arrived, cloaked men with sprained ankles, women with swollen bellies needing herbs to ease their pain, even a hunter bitten by his own hound. Each came in secret, whispering thanks before vanishing into the shadows. Darius watched from the cot, silent, struck by the contradiction. These were the same villagers who would cross the road to avoid her in daylight, who spoke of her with hushed suspicion. Yet under the cover of night they came, desperate, trusting, dependent, and she, the woman cast out by their voices, received them without hesitation. When the last visitor left and the cottage returned to quiet, Darius broke the silence. Why do you do it? Sabrina turned, startled by his voice. He sat upright now, eyes steady on her. Why help them? They hide you like a shameful secret, yet they come to you when they need saving. If it were me. He trailed off, the bitterness in his chest tightening his words. I would turn them away. Her gaze lingered on him, calm and unwavering. Then you would not be a healer. He frowned, but she stepped closer, her shawl drawn tight around her shoulders. It does not matter how they treat me. Their sickness bears no grudge. Their wounds do not care for politics or pride. If I turned them away, I would be no better than the nobles who condemned my family. My duty comes first, always. The words struck him like thunder. He had known warriors who prided themselves on loyalty, alphas who fought for dominance, nobles who clung to honor. But here stood a woman who had lost everything, home, family, name, and still chose compassion over vengeance. He looked at her, really looked, as the firelight carved her profile against the shadows. Her strength was not in dominance nor in sharp words, but in a heart that refused to harden. And in that moment Darius felt his wolf stir more fiercely than ever, its growl not of hunger but of yearning, to claim her, to protect her, to make her his. But he said nothing, biting down the urge. For now he was only a wanderer at her door, and she was the healer who had chosen to let him in. The days lengthened into something Sabrina had not known for years, a gentle rhythm shared with another soul. Darius remained in her cottage, though he spoke often of moving on. Somehow his boots stayed by the door, his voice filled the silence, and his presence slipped into the fabric of her daily life. One morning he stood outside chopping wood, his hair falling into his eyes as he wrestled with the axe. Sabrina leaned against the doorway, arms folded, watching him struggle. He paused, puffing, and glanced at her with mock irritation. Go on, laugh, he said, his lips twitching. She raised her brow, feigning composure. I wasn't going to. Yes, you were. He swung again, the log barely splitting. You're biting back a smile. Cruel healer, watching a poor wanderer suffer. Her laugh escaped before she could swallow it, light and unguarded. She pressed her fingers to her lips, startled by the sound. It had been so long. Darius straightened, grinning as though he had won something precious. There, he said softly. That laugh suits you more than silence. Her chest tightened at his words, and she turned away, suddenly flustered. Why did he always seem to peel away the layers she had built to protect herself? Later, as they gathered herbs in the forest, he crouched beside her, holding up a stalk uncertainly. This one? She shook her head, reaching to guide his hand. No, not that. Look closer. See the veins? The healing root hides beneath. Her fingers brushed his, and for a moment, neither moved. His hand was rough, calloused, yet steady beneath hers. She withdrew quickly, focusing on the earth, The warmth spread up her arm like a fire she could not quench. That night, over a simple meal of bread and broth, Darius leaned back in his chair, studying her. "You live so far from the village. Do you never feel lonely?" Her spoon stilled. She hesitated, then lifted her gaze to meet his. Loneliness became easier to bear than their stares. Out here, the trees don't whisper. The wind doesn't mock. Silence is kinder than people. He said nothing, but his eyes held hers, steady and unyielding, as if her words carved themselves into him. She felt exposed under that gaze, seen in a way that frightened her and yet warmed her. Later, as she carried water from the stream, the damp stones betrayed her. Her foot slipped, and before she could cry out, arms wrapped around her, pulling her against a body solid and warm. Her breath caught. She could hear his heartbeat, strong and sure. For one fragile moment, the world disappeared. No whispers, no exile, only the safety of his hold. "Careful," Darius murmured, voice low against her ear. When he released her, she lingered in the memory of his touch, heat rising in her cheeks. That night, lying awake, she turned it over in her mind. He was the first man who did not flinch from her, the first who looked at her not with suspicion or fear, but with something she had never known, something that made her feel like more than an outcast. A dangerous ache bloomed in her chest, one she dared not name, but it grew stronger with every glance, every laugh, every quiet word shared in the stillness of her cottage. For the first time in her life, Sabrina felt the fragile spark of being wanted. The night was thick with silence, broken only by the rustle of leaves and the far-off call of an owl. Sabrina sat by the doorway, her shawl wrapped loosely around her shoulders, watching the silver moon climb higher. Its light spilled across the clearing, painting her world in pale fire. She traced its glow with her eyes, wondering why the sight felt different tonight, why her chest ached with an unspoken longing she dared not name. Behind her, Darius set aside the logs he had carried in. His presence filled the small space, steady and unshakable, yet charged with something new, something restless. He stepped closer, the faint warmth of his body brushing against her as he sat beside her in the doorway. For a long while, neither spoke. The quiet between them was no longer awkward. It was alive, thrumming with unspoken words. Finally, Darius turned to her, his voice low. "You're quiet tonight." She forced a small smile. "The moon has a way of stealing words from me." His gaze lingered on her profile, the way the silver light kissed her skin. Something primal stirred within him. He had spent nights resisting it, holding back the fire clawing at his chest. But under this moon, her nearness was unbearable. Sabrina felt his eyes on her and shifted, her pulse quickening. "Why do you look at me that way?" she asked, her voice trembling more than she wished. Darius leaned closer, his hand brushing her arm in a touch so light it sent a shiver through her. "Because," he whispered, "I cannot look away." Her breath hitched. His face was inches from hers now, his eyes dark and searching. She thought, no, she was certain, he would kiss her. Her lips parted in anticipation, her heart racing with a wild, forbidden hope. But instead of claiming her mouth, his lips grazed the hollow of her neck. Sabrina gasped, the sensation like lightning darting through her veins. Her hands gripped his shoulders instinctively, torn between pulling him closer and pushing him away. "Darius." Her voice was barely a whisper, trembling with confusion, fear, and something far more dangerous. He inhaled her scent, raw need tightening every muscle in his body. His wolf howled within him, urging, demanding, claiming. He pressed his lips against her skin once more, softer this time, reverent, before the sharp edge of his teeth scraped her flesh. Sabrina froze, her pulse thundering in her ears. Then came the bite, swift, fierce, and searing. Pain lanced her neck, but it was swallowed instantly by a rush of heat, a binding fire that sank deep into her soul. Her body trembled, caught between shock and surrender. The world spun, yet Darius's arms held her firmly, grounding her. She felt something beyond flesh in that moment, a tether, invisible yet unbreakable, winding her essence to his. When he finally pulled back, his breath ragged, The mark glistened under the moonlight, crimson against pale skin. His eyes burned as he looked at her, torn between triumph and fear. Sabrina touched the spot, her fingers brushing the sting. "What? What did you do to me?" Darius's jaw tightened, his chest heaving. He longed to tell her, longed to reveal who he truly was and what that bite meant. But fear gripped him. Fear that once she knew, she would tear herself away. "I bound you to me," he said softly, voice rough with restraint. "You are mine now." Her heart raced wildly, her thoughts a whirlwind. She wanted to resist, yet the warmth flooding her veins betrayed her. Against all reason, part of her wanted to stay in his arms, to believe in the strange, consuming bond that had sparked between them under the moonlight. And so, in the silence that followed, neither spoke further. Only the silver moon bore witness to the fire that had begun, and the secret Darius still carried like a blade pressed to his own heart. The dawn crept slowly across the horizon, painting the sky with hues of rose and gold. Sabrina stirred in her bed, the faint sting at her neck still fresh, a reminder of the night before. Her fingers brushed the tender mark, and a rush of heat swept through her, equal parts fear and longing. She had no words for what he had done, no way to understand why his touch haunted her even in sleep. When she stepped outside, she found Darius waiting at the edge of the clearing. His cloak was fastened, his pack slung over his shoulder. There was a heaviness in his posture, as though he fought with himself to stand there instead of turning back to her. "You're leaving?" Her voice cracked, sharper than she intended. His gaze met hers, dark and unreadable, yet softened by something she could not name. "I must," he said. "There are places I need to return to, duties I cannot ignore." The words stung more than she expected. She crossed her arms, trying to shield herself from the sudden cold that swept through her chest. "So, you came here, turned my world upside down, and now you walk away?" Darius stepped closer, his hand reaching as though to touch her, then faltering midair. "I will return," he said firmly, almost a vow. "I swear it, Sabrina." Her heart skipped. He had finally spoken her name, and the sound of it on his lips melted something inside her. Yet the promise carried no comfort. Promises were fragile. She had learned that long ago. Still, she could not stop her voice from softening. "And if you don't?" He held her gaze, his jaw tightening. "Then I would rather die than fail you." Before she could reply, he turned and walked into the forest, his figure swallowed by mist and morning light. The cottage felt unbearably empty after his absence, the silence pressing against her like a weight. At first, she busied herself with chores, gathering herbs, tending to her fire, patching worn blankets, but everything reminded her of him. The sound of an axe against wood made her recall his laughter as he split logs beside her. The scent of herbs brought back his hands brushing hers when they worked together. Even the moonlight spilling across her bed at night whispered of his lips grazing her neck. But it was the bond, the wolf bond, that tormented her most. It tugged at her chest, a constant pull toward where he was, a restlessness that gave her no peace. At night she tossed and turned, her wolf inside her pacing, howling, yearning for its mate. She whispered into the dark, though no one could hear, "Why did you do this to me?" Her voice broke on the last word, tears sliding silently into her pillow. Days bled into nights, and still he did not return. Each sunrise stretched into endless hours of longing. Each evening, she found herself at the edge of the forest, staring into the distance, hoping, fearing, waiting. It frightened her, this need that consumed her. She had lived alone for so long, teaching herself to be strong, to survive without anyone. Yet one man, a stranger who carried secrets he would not share, had unraveled her so completely. The wolf bond made her hunger for him, but it was her heart that betrayed her most. She realized, with a mix of dread and wonder, that she had fallen for him. Fallen deeply, hopelessly, and that love terrified her more than her exile, more than the whispers of witchcraft, more than any curse she had ever borne. Each day of solitude became torture, every breath a reminder of the man who had marked her under the silver moon. And though she hated herself for it, Sabrina longed earnestly for the sound of his voice, the strength of his hands, the fire of his gaze. And in the quiet of her lonely nights, when the bond clawed at her soul, she whispered a truth she would never dare admit aloud. Come back to me. 7 days. 7 endless days of silence, of restless pacing, of waiting for footsteps that never came. The bond had not eased. It had only grown sharper, clawing at Sabrina's soul with every sunrise. She woke each morning with his name burning on her tongue, though she refused to speak it aloud. At night she traced the mark on her neck, hating it, craving it, needing it all at once. On the 7th evening, when the moon rose high and pale, she heard it, the sound of hooves thundering up the hill. Her heart leapt before her mind could catch up. She rushed to the doorway, pulse racing, eyes straining through the silver mist. But the figure that emerged was not the man she had cradled, nor the wanderer she had nursed back to health. It was him, and yet not him. Darius rode tall on a black stallion, clad in regal armor that glinted in the moonlight, his cloak trailing like a shadow behind him. At his side, knights flanked him, their banners fluttering with the crest of the royal house. His head was held high, his presence unmistakable. Sabrina's breath caught in her throat, the world tilting violently beneath her. The beggar she had fed, the stranger she had laughed with, the man who had bound her with his bite, was the Alpha King himself. He dismounted, his eyes searching hers, soft with the same longing that had kept her awake at night. Sabrina. His voice was gentle, almost pleading. I've come back to you. Her stomach twisted. Fury rose like wildfire, burning through the ache of longing. Back to me? She spat, her voice trembling with rage. You lied. You... Her hands shook as she pointed toward him. You stood here, in my home, listening to my pain, knowing it was your bloodline that cast me into exile. And still, you said nothing. Darius stepped forward, shedding his gloves as though to reach for her. I wanted to tell you. No, she snapped, her voice cracking. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them away, unwilling to let him see her break. You let me bare my soul, you let me believe you were different, but you're just like the rest of them, royal blood that ruins everything it touches. The knights shifted uncomfortably, glancing between their king and the furious woman before him. But Darius didn't care for their eyes, his gaze never left her. I am not the ones who banished your family. That was before my reign. You wear their crown. She cut him off sharply. Her chest heaved, every word dragged raw from the depths of her wound. You carry their blood. You are their son. And that makes you no different in my eyes. The wolf bond tugged mercilessly at her, whispering to run into his arms, but Sabrina turned away, clenching her fists. Every inch of her trembled, not just with anger, but with the agony of wanting him despite herself. Darius reached out, his voice breaking. Sabrina, please. Let me explain. Let me make it right. But she slammed the door shut, the sound echoing like thunder. The latch clicked into place, a barrier not of wood and iron, but of wounded trust. Outside, Darius stood frozen, the weight of her rejection heavier than any crown he had ever borne. For the first time in years, the Alpha King felt powerless, and inside her cottage, Sabrina slid down the door, her body shaking, tears spilling freely. The bond clawed at her heart, screaming for the man she had just shut out. But her hatred for the royal house roared louder. Love and fury warred inside her chest, each breath tearing her apart. The days that followed were a torment Sabrina could not name. She rose at dawn, fetched water, gathered herbs, and tended her fire, but every task felt hollow, empty. She told herself she hated him, told herself he was nothing but another face of the royal family she despised. Yet her wolf betrayed her with every breath. At night, the ache grew unbearable. The bond burned in her chest, pulling her toward him, clawing against the walls of her stubborn pride. She dreamed of his arms around her, of the way his lips had brushed her neck, of the fire that had ignited under the silver moon. She woke gasping, trembling, hating herself for the way her body longed for him. More than once she caught herself standing at the door, staring down the forest path as though her yearning alone might summon him back. Each time, shame washed over her, and she slammed the door shut, as if she could shut out her own weakness. Why did it have to be him? She thought bitterly. Why the king of all people? Her heart warred with itself. Love tangled with fury, longing with resentment. Surviving each day was not living. It was enduring, dragging her soul through fire while pretending she was untouched. Far away, in the golden halls of the palace, Darius faced his own storm. The council chamber was thick with incense and whispers, the nobles seated in semicircles of polished wood, their robes heavy with power. Queen Mother Eloise sat beside her son, regal and sharp-eyed, her gaze locked on him as he rose from the throne. "I have made my choice," Darius said, his voice steady though his heart still ached from Sabrina's rejection. "My Luna will not be among the nobles you parade before me. My Luna will be the healer, Sabrina." The chamber erupted instantly. "She is a witch," one noble cried, his fist slamming the table. "Her family was cast out by the crown," another shouted. "Bringing her back would disgrace this house." Murmurs spread like wildfire, accusations and gasps bouncing from wall to wall. The air was thick with disbelief and outrage. Eloise rose slowly, her figure commanding silence. Her voice was sharp as steel. "Have you lost your mind, my son? That woman bewitched you. There is no other explanation. A king does not take in the daughter of outcasts." Darius clenched his fists at his sides. "Bewitched?" His voice rang through the chamber, deep and thunderous. "You call her kindness witchcraft? You call her healing hands a curse? She does more for this kingdom in her exile than you all do with your titles and power." The nobles stirred, shifting uncomfortably, but Eloise did not flinch. She stepped closer, her eyes flashing. "I will not allow it. Not while I still breathe. The moon ceremony is for noble blood, for alliances that keep this kingdom strong. Do not drag us into shame with your stubbornness." Darius's jaw tightened, his wolf prowling restlessly beneath his skin. He met his mother's gaze unflinching. "I will not choose a mate to please your politics. I would rather stand alone than take another woman when my heart already belongs to her." Gasps rippled across the chamber. Some nobles lowered their eyes, scandalized. Others muttered under their breath, already plotting how to twist his words into chains. But Darius stood unyielding, his declaration ringing through the hall like a challenge none could ignore. And in her lonely cottage, far from the throne, Sabrina sat awake beneath the same moon, clutching her chest as if she could tear the restless bond free, unaware that her name had just set fire to the kingdom's highest court. The grand doors of the council chamber opened with a deep groan, the sound echoing like a threat through the stone hall. Sabrina was shoved forward, her wrists bound, though no chain could suppress the fierce dignity in her eyes. She kept her chin raised, refusing to let the stares of nobles and guards reduce her to nothing. Her heart, however, thrashed like a bird trapped in a cage, torn between rage at Darius for deceiving her, and the inexplicable pull of the bond that had not let her rest since he left. Gasps rippled through the room as she was brought before the throne. Some whispered witch, others deceiver, their voices blending into a venomous chorus. Sabrina met their gazes one by one, steady and unflinching, though each accusation stabbed at her already bleeding soul. Queen Mother Eloise sat tall, draped in silk and steel, her eyes sharp as blades. "You stand before this court accused of sorcery," she declared, her voice carrying the weight of command. "Your healing, unnatural. Your bond with the king, suspicious. Speak now, or let silence be your confession." Sabrina clenched her jaw. Every word burned on her tongue, but she swallowed them. She had spoken before, and it had only birthed more hatred. Better silence than wasted breath. But the nobles were not silent. One after another they rose, their words a storm. "She bewitched His Majesty. She manipulates the bond. Kill her now before the witch's blood spreads further." The hall thundered with demands for her death. Even the guards shifted uneasily, hands twitching at their swords. And then Darius stood, His voice cracked across the chamber like lightning, silencing the chaos. Enough. Every gaze swung toward him, but his eyes were only on her. You call her a witch, yet you run to her door in the dead of night for her healing. You condemn her, yet your children breathe today because of her hands. Hypocrites, all of you. The nobles stirred uneasily, their masks slipping. A heavy silence followed, and in it Sabrina's breath caught. He was defending her, publicly, fiercely. Queen Eloise's face tightened, her lips pressed into a thin line. You disgrace this throne, my son. You drag the crown into the dirt for a village girl. Darius turned to her slowly, his voice low but unyielding. Not a village girl, my chosen, my Luna. The chamber erupted again, but Sabrina barely heard it. Her heart pounded, torn in two. He was fighting for her, yes, but the betrayal of his lie still burned like salt in an open wound. Her eyes shimmered, not with gratitude but with fury and anguish. For all his declarations, he had still come to her in disguise, still made her fall without truth. When their eyes locked across the chamber, the bond hummed, wild and painful, like a rope pulling them closer, even as her heart screamed to push him away. The council chamber fell into a reluctant hush. Darius's words hung heavy in the air, a truth too sharp to deny. The nobles shifted uncomfortably, their voices stilled, their accusations swallowed by shame. None dared to meet his eyes. He had stripped them bare before one another, and the silence was more damning than any decree. But where the nobles faltered, Sabrina did not. Her heart remained sealed in bitterness, the sting of betrayal sharper than their hatred. She stood there, hands trembling, not from fear but from the storm raging inside her. The mate bond burned through her veins, demanding she yield, yet her spirit pushed back, refusing to be swayed by declarations made too late. Darius descended from the throne. Each step echoed not as kingly strides but as a man reaching toward the one soul who had unraveled him. When he stood before her, his hand lifted, hesitated, then fell to his side. "Don't look at me as their king," he said, voice rough. "Look at me as the man who sat in your cottage by the fire, the man who listened to your laughter, the man who found peace only with you." Sabrina's throat tightened. Her wolf whimpered within, desperate to bridge the distance, but her human heart recoiled. "You lied," she whispered, her voice cutting deeper than a shout. "You walked into my life cloaked in shadows, made me trust you, made me feel. And all the while, you were this." She gestured toward the throne, the crown, the chamber that reeked of power and deception. "I was afraid," Darius admitted, his gaze raw. "Afraid you would see the crown before you saw me. Afraid the bond between us would be tainted by duty, not love. I wanted you to know me, not the Alpha King." Her lips quivered, but her eyes stayed hard. "And what difference does it make now? You are still him, and I am still nothing to them." A ripple of murmurs stirred among the nobles, but Darius ignored them, his attention chained to her. "You are everything to me," he said fiercely. "Luna or not, crown or not, I will fight until you believe it, until you believe me." The chamber seemed to shrink around them, the council reduced to shadows in the background. Sabrina felt the mate bond thrumming louder, pulling her closer to the very man she wanted to despise. Her chest ached with the war between heart and soul, longing and resentment. She turned away, hiding the tears that threatened. "You can command them, Darius, but you cannot command me." And with that, she pulled free from the guard's grip and walked out of the chamber, her steps unsteady yet unyielding. Darius stood rooted in place, watching her go, the silence of the nobles suffocating him. For once his crown felt heavier than ever, not because of their judgment, but because of the pain in her eyes. For days after the council chamber had fallen into uneasy silence, Queen Mother Eloise could not rid herself of the image of her son's defiance. His words still echoed, his voice strong, his resolve unshaken. But what troubled her most was not Darius's rebellion against her will. It was the name on his lips, Sabrina. Eloise had lived long enough to know that hearts could be deceived. Love had toppled kings before, leaving kingdoms in ruin. She could not allow her son to bind himself to a woman cloaked in whispers of witchcraft and shame. If Sabrina was truly dangerous, Eloise would root it out, prove it, and protect her son. And so she summoned her spies. Quiet as shadows, they were dispatched to the villages, the markets, the lonely edges of the kingdom where Sabrina's name was known. Eloise expected reports of curses, manipulation, of men falling under her spell. But when the first scout returned, his tale was not of sorcery but of sacrifice. "My queen," he said, bowing low. A child lay fevered and near death. The mother carried him under the cover of night to the healer's cottage. She asked no coin, demanded no praise. She worked until her hands bled, and the child lived. Eloise dismissed him, unsettled. Perhaps it was only one account. A coincidence. But the second report followed swiftly, this time from an old woman. "She gave me herbs when no one else would," the spy recited. "Even though I spat at her feet in the daylight, she saved my life, and I cursed her name." By the third and fourth account, Eloise could no longer deny the pattern. Every voice returned with the same refrain. Sabrina was a woman who healed those who hated her, who carried burdens for the same villagers who branded her an outcast. Late into the night, Eloise sat alone in her chambers, the crown's weight pressing on her brow. Her hands tightened on the armrest as memories of her own youth returned, the sharp sting of whispers, the loneliness of being judged for her choices as queen. Had she become like the nobles she once despised? Had grief and fear made her cruel? For the first time, doubt bloomed in her heart. She stared into the fire, the flames flickering like the conflict in her chest. Could it be that the woman she sought to condemn was not a threat, but a mirror of strength, perhaps even the very balm her son had needed all along? The palace corridors were hushed when Sabrina was led through them, her steps echoing against polished stone. She had been summoned again, but not before the council, nor before the watchful eyes of nobles eager for her downfall. This time, the summons bore only a single seal, the personal crest of Queen Mother Eloise. The guards left her before an ornate door, their expressions unreadable. Sabrina's hand trembled slightly as she pushed it open. Inside, the Queen Mother sat alone, her crown set aside, her silver hair unbound, softening her regal bearing. The fire crackled low in the hearth, casting amber light across her face. "Come closer," Eloise said quietly, not with command, but with invitation. Sabrina obeyed, though her heart pounded. Every instinct warned her this was another test, another trap. But when she looked into Eloise's eyes, she saw not malice but something else. Weariness, perhaps even regret. For a long silence, they regarded one another. Then Eloise spoke, her voice lower than Sabrina had ever heard it. "You remind me of a girl I once knew. Proud, sharp, and too often misunderstood. She was judged for what she carried in her blood just as you have been. The council called her unfit, but she stood her ground. That girl was me." Sabrina blinked, stunned. She had never imagined Eloise capable of such honesty. "I wronged you. The crown wronged you and your family," Eloise continued, her fingers tightening on the carved armrest. "Your exile was not justice. It was fear, dressed as wisdom. I told myself it was for the safety of the realm, but in truth, I was blinded by the voices around me and by my own prejudice. For that, I ask your forgiveness." The words hung in the air, heavy and strange. Sabrina's throat constricted. She wanted to spit out her anger, to remind Eloise of the years she had spent alone, shunned, cursed by whispers. But something in Eloise's tone, something fragile, held her tongue. "You speak of forgiveness," Sabrina said at last, her voice steady though her hands trembled. "But can you undo the nights I wept in silence? Can you undo the way children pointed at me in the streets, calling me cursed? Can you return the family I lost?" Pain flickered across Eloise's face, but she did not look away. "No," she admitted. "I cannot. But perhaps I can do this much. I can see you now, not as an exile, nor as a danger, but as a woman of strength, as the one who has healed where others would have turned away." Sabrina's heart wavered. No noble had ever spoken to her like this, not with reverence, not with sincerity. and yet her wounds were deep, her trust fragile. "I don't know if I can forgive you or the crown," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Not yet." Eloise inclined her head, accepting the answer without protest. "Then let it be not forgiveness, but truth between us. You owe me nothing, Sabrina, but know this. I see now why my son chose you, and though it pains me, I cannot call him wrong." The room was still, the firelight bending across their faces, two women bound by pride, pain, and an uncertain future. For the first time, Eloise's doubt had given way to something stronger, respect, and for the first time Sabrina felt the walls around her heart tremble, though they did not yet fall. The grand hall of the palace was filled with murmurs. The nobles gathered once more under the glow of 1,000 torches. The carved pillars stood tall, as though listening, as though bearing witness. Darius sat on the high throne, his posture rigid, his gaze fixed like steel on those who once believed their whispers could sway him. At his side stood Queen Mother Eloise, her eyes quieter now, her expression unreadable. Sabrina had been summoned again, though this time not to defend herself, not to be accused. She walked into the hall with a heavy heart, her steps uncertain, her mind replaying Eloise's words from their private meeting. The stares followed her, sharp, probing, some even venomous. Yet, for the first time, there was also hesitation in those eyes, even shame. When she reached the foot of the throne, the hush became complete. Darius rose slowly, the weight of his crown glinting under the flames. His voice carried across the chamber, low but thunderous, each word deliberate. "For too long," he began, "the name of the healer's family has been spoken as though it were a curse. For too long, fear and prejudice dictated their fate. Tonight, before the moon and before this council, I break those chains." Gasps rippled across the hall. Sabrina's breath caught in her throat, her fingers curling against her palms. "From this day forward," Darius continued, "the exile placed upon the healer's family is lifted. Their honor is restored. Their names are to be spoken not with disdain but with respect." His eyes, sharp and unyielding, swept over the council. "No longer will whispers rule this kingdom. No longer will fear dictate justice." The nobles shifted uneasily. Some lowered their heads, unable to meet his gaze. Others clenched their jaws but said nothing, silenced by the raw force of his authority. Eloise, watching from her place beside him, did not speak, but a subtle nod passed between her and her son. Sabrina stood frozen, her heart thundering. She had dreamt of this moment in secret, when she dared to hope the past could be undone, but she had never believed it would come to pass. Her knees trembled as though they might give way. And then, beyond the palace walls, the news spread like wildfire. By morning, the villagers no longer crept to her cottage in the shadows. They came openly, bringing gifts of grain, fruit, and flowers, their faces unmasked by fear. Some bowed deeply, others simply clasped her hands, whispering words of gratitude they had kept hidden for years. For the first time, children laughed at her doorway, not mocking but in delight as she gave them herbs and honey to soothe their coughs. Women pressed their palms to her cheeks, tears in their eyes. Even old men who once spat at the mention of her family's name now lowered their heads in apology. Sabrina stood among them, the weight she had carried for so long loosening at last. She felt the ache of the years, every lonely night, every bitter tear, softened beneath the warmth of acceptance. Yet even in this triumph her heart twisted, for the one who had freed her was the same man she still struggled to forgive. As the moon rose that night, casting its silver glow upon her cottage, Sabrina stepped outside and looked up. The chains of her past had broken, yes, but the chains of her heart still held fast, torn between love and anger, desire and fear. And somewhere within the palace walls, Darius too stared into the night, longing for the day when she would look at him not as a king, not as a betrayer, but as her mate. The air in the palace gardens was thick with the perfume of night-blooming flowers, their petals unfurling beneath the silver glow of the moon. Sabrina wandered alone, her steps slow, her mind a storm of warring emotions. The chains of exile had been broken, Yet her heart still carried scars. Every kindness she had received from Darius clashed with every memory of the pain inflicted by his crown. Love or hate, forgive or condemn. Her soul stood at that trembling edge, unable to leap. She found herself near the marble fountain, its waters glistening like liquid starlight. And there he was, Darius, standing tall, yet his shoulders bore the weariness of a man waiting for a judgment he could not force. When his eyes met hers, they softened, his kingly armor stripped away until only the man remained. "I know," Darius said, his voice quiet but steady, "that every wound carved into your past carries my family's crest. I know I cannot erase it. But Sabrina—" He stepped closer, his gaze holding hers, raw and unguarded. "If you can see me not as their heir, but as the man who knelt broken at your door, let me be yours. Not your king. Not your enemy. Yours." Her breath caught. The ache in her chest swelled, pressing against the walls of her bitterness. Tears pricked her eyes. She had sworn never to bend, never to forgive. But the truth of her heart surged like a tide, unstoppable. Sabrina's voice trembled as she whispered, "I tried to hate you." Her fingers twisted at her side, but her eyes never left his. "Every day I told myself you were just another face of the crown that ruined me. But the bond won't let me lie. My heart won't let me lie. Darius, I love you." The confession left her lips like a surrender, yet it felt like freedom. In an instant, Darius was upon her, closing the distance with a hunger held back too long. His hands cupped her face, strong yet trembling, as though she might vanish if he did not hold her. Their lips met in a clash of fire and desperation, her bitterness melting into heat, his longing erupting into need. The kiss was not gentle. It was consuming, raw, and wild, as though years of loneliness, anger, and desire had ignited all at once. Her fingers tangled in his hair, pulling him closer, while his arms wrapped around her waist, crushing her against him as though he could fuse them into one. Sabrina gasped against his mouth, and he trailed kisses along her jaw, his lips grazing the sensitive hollow of her throat. She shivered, her wolf howling within her, the bond singing louder than her doubts ever had. "I forgive you," she whispered into the night, her voice breaking as tears spilled down her cheeks. "I forgive you. And the crown. Not for them, but for us." Darius pressed his forehead to hers, his breath ragged, his eyes burning with devotion. "You've given me more than I deserve, and I swear, Sabrina, I'll spend the rest of my life proving worthy of it." Under the silvered moon, their kiss deepened again. Not just a meeting of lips, but the sealing of a choice. Love over hate, forgiveness over bitterness. And as the night stretched on, the garden held witness to two souls who had finally surrendered to the truth they could no longer deny. The night of the moon ceremony arrived, heavy with anticipation. The palace grounds, vast and glowing with silver lanterns, were filled with nobles, warriors, and villagers alike. For generations, the sacred night had bound leaders to chosen mates, political unions cloaked in divine ritual. But tonight was different. Tonight, all eyes would witness a bond forged not by power, but by love. Sabrina stood at the edge of the ceremonial circle, her heart thrumming like a war drum beneath her ribs. The flowing white gown they had given her shimmered faintly, as though it carried the moonlight itself. Yet despite the beauty, she felt the weight of every stare. Nobles sneered behind forced smiles. Villagers whispered, some in awe, some in doubt. Even those who had once crept to her cottage under cover of darkness now looked openly upon her. At the center of the circle stood Darius, the Alpha King, his crown gleaming but his eyes fixed only on her. When she stepped forward, guided by the pull of the bond, the crowd parted in silence. Every breath she took seemed to echo. Every step felt like a promise. When she reached him, Darius extended his hand. "Are you ready?" he asked softly, a question meant only for her, though thousands watched. Her fingers slipped into his. "I am," she whispered, the tremor in her voice swallowed by the certainty in her heart. The high priestess raised her arms, her voice carrying over the gathered crowd. Under the sacred light of the moon, the Alpha King takes his Luna. Let their bond be sealed, not by politics, not by fear, but by the will of the goddess. As the chant began, the moon broke free from a passing cloud, bathing them in silver light. The bond between them flared, a fierce and undeniable tether of soul to soul. Darius's gaze darkened with reverence as he lowered his head, brushing his lips along her neck. Sabrina shivered, her wolf rising in response. Then came the moment. His fangs sank gently into the tender flesh of her shoulder, a bite that was not pain but fire, a claiming that set her blood aflame. Sabrina gasped, clutching him, her own lips grazing his skin in answer, her instincts guiding her to complete the bond. She bit softly, sealing the mark, their souls entwining until there was no longer him and her, only them. The crowd erupted. Some gasped in shock, some wept openly, others bowed in reverence. The nobles who once sneered could only lower their heads, silenced by the undeniable bond blazing in the air like sacred fire. Villagers cheered, their voices rising into the night. The once banished healer now stood not as an outcast but as their queen, their Luna. Darius cupped her face and kissed her, tender but unyielding, as though the moon itself bore witness to their triumph. Sabrina melted into him, every scar of the past softening beneath the promise of their future. The chains of exile, of hatred, of loneliness, shattered. When they finally broke apart, the priestess's voice rose once more. Behold your king and Luna. May their love heal not only themselves but the kingdom that bears their names. Sabrina's eyes swept over the crowd, and for the first time in her life she did not see whispers of scorn. She saw respect. She saw hope. And with Darius's hand in hers, she felt the bridge rising, not just between them, but between the kingdom's wounds and the promise of tomorrow. The moon shone brighter, as if blessing their union, and in its silver light Sabrina knew the truth. Their love had not only redeemed them, it had begun to redeem the world around them. Thank you, Moonshakes, for running with me through every moonlit night, every stolen glance, every heart-stopping twist of Sabrina and Darius's journey. If you enjoyed this story, please leave a comment below. Tell me your favorite scene, your favorite character, and what moment made your heart race the most. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss the next love story we create together under the moonlight. You are the reason these stories live, breathe, and shine. Until the next one, stay wild, stay brave, and keep howling at the moon.